Over the past few weeks, I don't believe any other game has dominated so much of my time as Battlerite has. Having played it for a decent amount of time back when it was in an early access stage, it's now been officially out for a while and I've spent that time learning every hero and climbing my way to the Grand Champion League, the top league of Battlerite's matchmaking. After a significant amount of games, I do truly believe it to be one of the best player versus player experiences out there right now. But before I even continue, let's establish one thing first. Battlerite is not a MOBA. Certainly it fits the MOBA term perfectly, multiplayer online battle arena. It fits it far better than what type of game people generally refer to when we say MOBA, but that's exactly the problem. Genre names aren't exactly specific. Computer RPG, action RPG, or indeed MOBA is simply a way for gamers to refer to specific groups of games, and if you start comparing Battlerite to what people will refer to as a MOBA, a game like Dota, League of Legends, Smite, Heroes of the Storm, Dawngate, or Heroes of Newerth, you'll find that it has very little in common. It shares the isometric viewpoint that MOBAs usually employ, it has characters with abilities, but almost every game does nowadays, and there is a lot of player versus player combat, but that's basically where it stops. A huge part of a MOBA tends to come down to macro and player versus environment gameplay, controlling the map, jungling, visiting a shop to buy items, and pushing different lanes in order to slowly whittle down the enemy's fortified structures are key to a MOBA experience, in one way or another. Battlerite doesn't have that level of macro, not even close. Instead, it's a game that entirely and beautifully relies on your mechanical mastery. It's entirely micro and far more demanding micro than your average MOBA will contain. In many aspects, it is closer to a fighting game, though that's not an excellent comparison either. The closest example I can probably think of would be MMO Arena PvP. Calling Battlerite a MOBA is doing Battlerite a disservice and sets up entirely the wrong expectations. So what is Battlerite? Battlerite is a purely player versus player arena-based game in which you control one character utilizing skill shots, managing cooldowns, landing counters, feinting and cancelling your own abilities, and properly timing your invulnerability frames in order to dominate the enemy team. Teams which consist of either 2 players or 3. It's a unique title, it requires a lot of mastery and mechanical knowledge, and it's very addicting once you get into it. Battlerite is a free-to-play title, which features loot boxes, what doesn't nowadays, but it does so quite well. It offers a one-time purchase which will unlock every champion and every upcoming new champion permanently, and loot boxes are easily obtained by playing with no power items. Getting into the title does take a bit of work, it's a very skill-intensive game with a high skill ceiling, and if you're likely to get frustrated by being beaten by better players, that's a big hurdle to get over. That said, when I was still a beginning player, what probably blew me away the most was the impeccable balance of Battlerite's champions. Although there's definitely a lot of variance in skill floor between champions, and you might very well get an initial liking to a much tougher champion, you can get to the higher leagues, Diamond 5 at least, with any of them, and this goes for both 2v2 and 3v3, although 3v3 is without a doubt better balanced. And champions, by and large, are very well designed, and since I've been playing, most of the changes Stunlock Studios have made to champions in patches, I found agreeable. There's a few broken standouts for me, such as Raygon, who is a complete newbie stomper and becomes entirely worthless once you get past Diamond, or a hero like Freya, which punishes your team members as well when you mess up, which I don't believe is an enjoyable mechanical element to deal with, and certainly a lot of 2v2 compositions are very hard to beat, such as going up against Shifu and Pearl, which might as well be considered the absolutely strongest 2v2 combination. But most of these problems aren't going to become apparent until you're very experienced with the game, and without a doubt it's the most balanced I've seen a champion-based PvP game in a long time. Additionally, the game title itself refers to the Battlerite system, which is a quick loadout mechanic that everyone selects before a match starts. If you're starting out, you're likely going to stick to one set combination you find works best for you, and that's fine. You might, however, falsely come to believe that there's not enough choice involved as you become used to one specific combination, but the more I ended up playing the game, the more I felt like there was actually a solid choice element involved. I stuck with one loadout, and only one, on Rukan until I reached Diamond, at which point I noticed a definite improvement once I thought of different tactics for different opponents which involved different Battlerites. It's not a particularly elaborate system, but it offers a nice baseline choice within how you like to play your characters. Then the meat of the title, the combat, is where Battlerite absolutely shines and almost every mechanic feels well thought out. You slow down when you attack, making endless kiting far more difficult and creates an inherent positioning and engagement challenge for melee. You can't normally heal back to full health. preventing the rather dull role of heal bots in Battlerite, as every 40 damage taken reduces your maximum HP, and the only way to gain this back is through the small map control element introduced by periodically spawning orbs in the center of the map. This orb mechanic offers a good secondary objective other than mindless rushdown while simultaneously preventing the enemy team from turtling, as this will likely cost them the middle and as a result cost them healing and energy gain. Energy gain which can be used on specific EX abilities and an ultimate ability, which tend to have quite a major impact when timed well. Stuns and crowd control elements are very small. Despite that the developers are called Stunlock Studios, you're unlikely to pull off any effective stun locking. The worst offender here likely being Shifu's rather easy to use Incapacitate, one of the main reasons he's absolutely top tier, but I digress. The point is that locking down an enemy generally requires good aim, specific timing, and only grants you a small window of opportunity, a window which a good player will exploit to the fullest. Champions themselves are roughly categorized as melee, ranged, and support, but for the most part every one of them has no obvious hard counters. Weaknesses? Definitely. A Thorn does very poorly against other melee for instance, but nevertheless, even if you're a support, you can absolutely pull off a 2v1 win, providing you're good enough. And pulling off a 2v1 or executing a different strategy if you're in a pre-made team and get a rematch against someone you just lost against is incredibly satisfying due to the high mechanical demand of the game. What bothers me then, at this stage of the game and after a significant amount of time spent mastering the title, is relatively little when it comes to actual gameplay. Certainly there are a few things I'd like to see adjusted. In general, I think characters could do with a movement speed increase, offering high skill players more outplay potential through movement, which is far less of a factor than I think it should be, and in a similar vein, I believe that most hitboxes in the game are too large on skill shots. Neither of these assist newer players, however, and are unlikely to be a hindrance until you get to the upper echelons of matchmaking. In the Champion and Grand Champion leagues, I find the game can sometimes become too much of a cooldown burn, luring out each other's abilities rather than going for any specific clever moves, but the game hasn't become any less fun than it was when I was starting out, and doesn't devolve into turtling or overly defensive metas, it doesn't turn into a game that always plays out the same, and it doesn't turn into only a few viable champions. It's a very fun experience to face off against other highly skilled players, and Battlerite is without a doubt a game that absolutely rewards you for the time you put in. No, instead, where Battlerite needs drastic improvement lies in the matchmaking itself. Luckily, a few of my complaints should disappear when the next season arrives, as it'll include a pre-game lobby in which you select your champions and ban specific maps, which hopefully will be a big step in eliminating unfair matchups, which at Grand Champion League can definitely be the case. If you're in a 3v3 and your team lacks a support, you'll generally lose. If you're in a 2v2 as, say, Rukan and your random ally is a Thorn, the chances of winning against a Shifu and Bako are next to nothing, but again these are mostly issues raised at Champion League or above. Hopefully this system will eliminate the problem without slowing down the game too much, but we can only wait and see. What then hasn't been announced and certainly should change, as it also largely impacts beginning players and is likely a big driving force in scaring players away from the title, comes down to how matchmaking rewards you based on performance. And I say performance with quite some spite in mind. Basically, if you lose every round, you will lose a significant amount of points, whereas if you lose 2-3, you won't lose that much. Likewise, if you win 3-0, you'll gain a lot more. The problem here is that, certainly in solo queue, you are being paired with a random teammate against random enemies. Champion selection aside, there's always the chance that your team member is having a bad day, and the loss starts to feel very much out of your hands. In that case, being further punished for losing what seems like an unwinnable round is very detrimental to the latter experience. This is even more amplified in 3v3, as your potential to carry a game is obviously lower in a situation with 3 enemies rather than 2. Not to mention there's plenty of Smurf accounts around, which means that a lot of lower league players will suddenly go up against a Smurf that beats them 3-0, which they then further get unfairly punished for. Furthermore, I think in pre-made matches a group of individual Grand Champion players should immediately be placed in Champion League, and if they then start losing, they should of course be demoted. As right now, 2v2s in particular are in a strange place when it becomes a real struggle to advance past High Platinum or Diamond, as you suddenly get faced off against a much stronger team, only to find out later that they were both Grand Champion. Not exactly fair if you are playing with a friend who is Platinum or Diamond on his own. And finally, another big new player deterrent comes in the form of the casual game mode. Unfortunately, it seems casual isn't bound by any MMR or ranking mechanics, meaning that it's entirely possible as a bronze, silver, or gold player to go up against a Grand Champion player, which really is for neither groups much of a fun experience. At the very least, they should pair casual by account level to get some semblance of balanced teams. In the end, Battlerite is a fantastic title, and if you have any interest in player versus player combat, I would very much recommend giving it a fair shot. It is easily the most fun I've had in a competitive title in a long time. Despite the matchmaking issues, it is without a doubt an incredibly joyous and mechanically deep title worth learning and understanding with a fair payment model. Thank you for watching, my name has been Haas, and I'll see you in the next video.
Death vortex approaching.